Tell us a little bit about your NFL career, your growth as a quarterback coming from college and going to the NFL.
There really wasn't much to speak of. I was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles in 1988, and I was a backup to Randall Cunningham there in Philly, and then went to Houston for a year. Was a backup to Warren Moon there. So my NFL career was sort of anticlimactic following, what was a Hall of Fame college career.
Let's talk about a little bit after football. Coming out writing an amazing book, talking about feminists and gender roles. I have two daughters, so this really, when I heard that, it really got my attention. What got you onto that path after playing football?
I retired from football in 1994, and I went to Northeastern University to the Center for the Study of Sport and Society to work with a guy named Richard Lapchick, who many people in New York might know that name because his dad was the first head coach and general manager of the New York Knicks. And the guy did a lot of work around racism in sports, still is one of the foremost voices out there. But when I got there to Northeastern, I met a guy named Jackson Katz, who introduced me to the whole issue of men's violence against women and masculinity and things that I had never discussed, never examined. I've been working in schools since I was a sophomore in college at Syracuse University and never thought about masculinity and what it meant to be a man and what impact that view has on women and issues of men's violence against women. And so it was an eye-opening moment for me, and it was been the last quarter century of my life doing work around gender-based violence and masculinity. And what's really expanding in that work is not just the issue of men's violence against women, which is what brought me to the work, but also the conversation around masculinity, which gets into so many issues that we deal with in football. Everything from how do we deal with injuries, how do we deal with depression, how do we deal with life after the game. There's just so many ways in which it intersects with the lives of athletes.
Donald, with CTE going on with the NFL and the NFL trying to figure out some new rule changes and transition the game to save and make the game safe, what are your thoughts with some of the players that you played with that have come down with CTE, brain damage, brain trauma? What were your thoughts when you heard about CTE and the backlash behind it?
Obviously, CTE is a real condition, but I think there are bigger issues when you talk about what players deal with in terms of their mental and emotional health. I don't believe that CTE is the reason behind the suicides. I have 32 guys that I played ball with. And I'm sure, Eric, if you go and think about how many guys you played ball with in college and pros, how many of them are dead? And I have 33 guys that I played ball with in NFL, CFL, and college who were dead. And it's not all brain injuries and guys commit suicide, although there were 6 suicides among that number. In many cases, it's guys who just did not take care of themselves and did not ask for help. Even the suicides and some of the more famous suicides will point to CTE, will point to head injuries, but we won't point to depression. We won't point to financial problems and marital problems and professional problems and lack of identity and loss of identity. Junior Seau talked about how no one knew him in the airport. Think about the loss of identity for so many guys who live a life in the light, and all of a sudden you're nobody after the game. There's so many other issues more than just head injuries that we can do something about. I played football since the time of 10 years old to 29 for 19 years, banging my head against and multiple concussions. If concussions are the reason for CTE, that the reason guys are losing their lives, I would be dead. I just wrote a book. And so there are things you can do, and I think that we have to pay more attention to who players are as whole people and not just as the warriors on the field, because that's what makes them vulnerable.
No, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I know that when I stepped away from the game, I definitely struggled with my identity. It was, who am I? I always consider myself as more than a football player, but, stepping off the field, it was like, okay, what am I now? My identity has changed, like you said. I've been playing football. I've been noticed. People know me as the football player, and now my identity has changed and the depression creeps in and things kind of snowball from there if you don't get a hold of it. We had Tony Richardson on a call last week, and he's a part of the NFL Legends community, and they're trying to be proactive in helping players transition out of the game and find, give them counseling, marital counseling. It's a wonderful thing that the NFL is taking charge and taking the proactive approach on post-football. But, I wanted to get back. I know that you're involved heavily in college football. With COVID going on, with universities shutting down, what are your thoughts on a college football season? What do you think that they should do going forward?
It's something that has been something I've been focused on very acutely. I spend most of my time traveling and speaking with college campuses, so I work closely in higher education. I also do some consulting work on emergency preparedness for large venues like stadiums. And I can tell you, I don't think there's going to be a college season. I don't even think they're going to get off the ground in college. I think as soon as you bring student athletes back, we've already seen it. We've already seen them bring them back and all the multiple tests, positive tests that have come up. It's not going to be up to the schools. People think it's going to be up to guys like Greg Sankey and other conference commissioners. It's not. It's going to be up to the state and the Board of Health. And if they say you can't gather in 10 or more, well, there goes football. And so there are going to be, I think, a number of factors that are going to impede the season. I don't think that most of higher education will come back in-person classrooms. So there's a real precarious place that college football and a lot of the major institutions find themselves in their overdependence on college football financially. It's going to expose some really big issues with COVID.
As you guys know, we're talking to former NFL and CFL quarterback Donald McPherson. Donald, when you look at athletes playing college ball, do you think that college athletes should get paid? There's so much going on right now in the NCAA. Some players being suspended, or you're hearing stories with the NCAA with basketball. Some players getting $100,000 to come and play for their organization, play for their school. Do you think college players should get paid?
No, but let me expand that, because I've spent for the last 20 years of my life on this conversation. Because I don't believe that athletes should be paid. I think what we should do, and what higher education needs to do, is make good on the first promise. The only thing any college coach has ever promised an athlete to recruit with is the opportunity to compete and to get an education. And we failed on the latter. We failed on the, and listen, no one's asking should volleyball players or softball players be paid. Let's be very blunt about who we're asking, who we're saying we should be paid, and where the name, image, and likeness legislation is coming from. It's coming from the blatant exploitation, primarily of black athletes in football and basketball, that are going to predominantly white institutions and coming out of those institutions without a meaningful education, while the schools are making millions and millions, if not billions of dollars in aggregate. So the conversation about being paid is, to me, is let's educate them and include them in the business that they are driving. And that's the education that I believe is more valuable than any money you can pay an athlete in 4 years of college. And, realistically, they're going to play, 2 of the 4 or 5 years that you get them on the field. And so I know it's a great argument, hey, throw money at the problem. The reality is what they need, what student athletes need, and what people need more than throwing money at the problem is education. I liken the argument of paying them to, a kid who really needs the attention of the parent, but the parent just throws money at them and says, go to the mall. And the reality is that the colleges need to do a better job of educating, preparing student athletes for life after the game, life after the sport. And that, to me, is the first promise that they need to make do on before they start throwing other solutions that take them away from the value of education. The education is way more valuable than the dollars you can throw at a kid.
Donald, there's a lot of players that they're really, especially in college football, they play 2 years of college football, and then they go into the NFL draft. Some obviously go for their college education, and they want to finish their college education before they have the opportunity to play professional sports. My problem is why are college athletes, college students, not allowed to go over to an autograph session and make some money off of their autographs or their jersey signings? I understand that the college, you don't think the college should be paying the players out of their pockets, but if the players want to make some money on the side where they can pay for food or pay for a car bill or pay for some gas money or whatever they're trying to use the money for, don't you think the players should be allowed to use that opportunity for their fame to go out there and make some money on the side?
There's no question about it that the name, image, and likeness legislation is coming from that place that you're speaking of, that place where they should be allowed to go do those things. And the reality is they should be. Yes, absolutely. There's no question they should be. The question is how you do it, and how do you, and the problem that we have now, because the schools and quite frankly the schools have created this problem. have not wanted to include student athletes in the business that has grown around them, and that, quite frankly, they've been in many ways responsible for its growth. They don't want to include them in the business, and so what you're saying to that athlete is, we have this multi-million-dollar enterprise that you're at the center of, but go into a third marketplace and find your own money. Go into a third marketplace and find your own deals. As long as they don't conflict with us, as long as you'll use our markers and show your affiliation with our institution, you go make that deal. Well, that's a heady thing, one, to tell an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid to go out and make their own deals. And two, it misses the opportunity to include them in the business. And the reality is there aren't going to be many. It's a great argument from the outside, but there really aren't going to be many student athletes out there who are going to demand a big number based on their second year at Syracuse University. I'm not going to make a significant amount of money. I got to go out and hustle. I got to go out and make that money, and that's not why I went to college. I was going to college to hustle, to try to make a few extra dollars off my my name as a football player. I wanted to get an education. Should be focused on getting an education and playing the game.
As you guys know, we are talking to former NFL and CFL quarterback Donald McPherson. Donald, before we let you go, I want to talk a little bit about your book. And you were speaking to, when Eric asked you the question, a little bit about your book. And if you guys don't know what his book is called, it's called You Throw Like a Girl, The Blind Spot of Masculinity. So tell us a little bit about your book and why you decided to write this book.
I actually wrote the book many years ago, back in the early 2000s. And it was, as I said, when I retired, I learned about this issue of violence against women, sexual domestic violence, and all forms of men's violence against women. It was an eye-opening experience, and I had to learn, I had to think about when I learned what it meant to be a man, and how did I learn it. And it wasn't intentional, it wasn't deliberate, it was sort of inferred. And what kept coming back to me was that language that I heard as a little boy. And you throw like a girl was this really profound statement that I kept hearing, as I thought about when I learned what it meant to be a man. And so that's where it comes from. There's a clip that's from a film based on my book on my website, which is donmcpherson.com. And the clip is a scene from The Sandlot, when the boys are taunting one another, and I liken it to the scene in Braveheart when the two armies square up and they throw insults back and forth. And the ultimate insult that is levied is, you play ball like a girl. and that language does two things immediately. This is a book based on a lecture I've been doing for about 20 years on college campuses. The first thing is that boys learn to man up, to suck it up, and that really rigid understanding of masculinity, to be tough, strong, don't cry, don't back down. By the way, this is linked directly to issues around head injuries and concussions, and guys saying, "Hey, I need help. I'm struggling. I can't do this. I need, we're not nurtured and learned to ask for help, to seek help." And so that's the first part of it. And that's the blind spot of masculinity, because a real man is a tough, strong, don't back down guy. Well, that guy's an idiot, right? That guy who can't ask for help, that guy who's going to, and he's going to get himself into trouble. And that's the blind spot, right? The blind spot is that there's privilege in that. There's success in that, but there's also a lot of pain in that, a lot of pain that you cause yourself. And the second part of You Throw Like a Girl is that it wouldn't be an insult to a boy to call him a girl if the attitude was that women and girls are less than. And that was fundamentally at the core of violence against women, our attitudes about women, our attitudes about their welfare, about their rights. It gets into gender equity issues and a whole host of other issues outside of just the larger issue of violence against women. And so that's what the book is about. It's really about men and our journey through how we learn what it means to be a man through sports and other things like media and family. And the last chapter is titled "Be Your Son's Father, Not Your Father's Son." In other words, we have to be better than the previous generation. And we have to grow and be better than our fathers were in terms of how we nurture, how we care, how we parent, all those different ways in which we as men have to grow and develop.
How do the fans find the book? Where could they find the book if they want to read the book?
You can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. If you go to my website, as I said, donmcpherson.com, there's a page, there's access to how to get the book. as well as the video on my website. And the reception has been very positive so far. You know, it released in September, and prior to COVID, it did a number of events in different parts of the country, and the conversations have been pretty good.